of you guys know me, some of you guys have worked with me before. I wanted to start off today because ADUs have been around for a while now. How many of you have done an ADU yourself? Okay, and how about, do you have clients or friends who've done an ADU? Okay, so it looks like, maybe 40% of people have direct experience doing these at this point. And, they've been around since January of 2017, sort of in their current form, and the state has rapidly updated their regulations to, really in response to local jurisdictions trying weaselly ways to sort of evade compliance. The state is just as quickly updating their laws to close loopholes that local jurisdictions are using to still impede ADUs. And they did a big one in 2018, but the ones that took effect in January of this year are like, they're updates on steroids. They really went far with these ones in January. So I'm sharing the presentation time with another presenter from Californians for Homeownership. So I'm going to try to keep my stuff brief, but I'm going to go over the major changes that happened as of January 1st. So the biggest change, well, it's hard to say any of these are the biggest change, but a huge change that affects all of us around here is there's no longer an owner occupancy requirement for having an ADU. The county of Santa Barbara never had an owner occupancy requirement. They realized up front that there was no way for that to be enforceable, so they thought it was dumb and they never did it. Of course, the city of Santa Barbara, that never met a regulation it didn't like, they decided that they would have an owner occupancy requirement, but they were still smart enough to say they're only doing it in single family zones. So even going back to their original local ordinance, and even before the local ordinance, they had owner occupancy requirements, but they didn't have them in multifamily zones. The logic being that you can already have multifamily projects there that didn't have an owner occupancy requirement, and we all made the point that, just because you're doing an ADU doesn't mean you need an on-site babysitter. We should have the same rights as everyone else, and the city council agreed with that, even though staff tried to push it. So no owner occupancy requirements. Some people have gotten dismayed when the city has asked them to sign a covenant, and they think that's all owner occupancy, but the covenant that they're asking you to sign now has to do with not renting your ADU for less than 30 days. And that is authorized by state law. They can have that covenant, and state law doesn't allow you to do it either. So just make sure when you look at your covenants that the only provisions in there that you see are for the rental term and not any owner occupancy. Okay, so the next big change is where can you have ADUs? So before, you were only allowed to have an ADU on a property that either had a single family home on it or had a single family home proposed on it concurrent with the ADU. And proposed means the configuration. So, in some cases, I've had people that had like a duplex and they wanted to do an ADU and the city said, no, you can't. But concurrent with the ADU proposal was reconfiguring the duplex to a single family home. And after a 6-month argument with the city in one case, they finally agreed that, yeah, that's what state law says. And that's what it always said, and we could have saved 6 months. But anyway, they agreed in the end of it. So that's changed now. And on single family lots now, you are allowed to have both an ADU and a JADU. That's a junior ADU. Junior ADUs have been around since 2017 also, and a lot of people that I talk to they're not really clear on the differences, and I've had a lot of realtors say, oh, we can have 2 ADUs now, right? And that's wrong. You can't have 2 ADUs. You can have a junior ADU and an ADU. And a junior ADU has to be 500 square feet or less, and you can't turn your garage into a JADU. It has to be created out of an existing bedroom. That's what the state law says. So the idea behind a JADU is it's a really quick way to create a living area, a second living area in your house without having to comply with 100% of building code standards. So when you do an ADU and you're converting part of your house to an ADU, it's a whole separate unit. It's got to comply with the building code for a separate unit, and that includes things like its own climate control system. The big one that gets everybody is a fire separation between that unit and the existing unit. And getting a fire separation, it's feasible in most cases, but a lot of people don't understand it. They don't realize they're going to have to do it. With a JADU, you don't need any of that stuff. So it can be, you can even share a bathroom in your house with a JADU. Now the kicker on a JADU is those do require owner occupancy. So if you're gonna have one of those, you are gonna have owner occupancy. So the people that are all excited that they can buy properties and have 2 ADUs on them and rent 3 units out, that's not gonna happen, and that's not the intent of the law. Whereas now you can do an ADU and rent 2 units out, and that's fine. And I think that is the intent of the law, is to just provide housing, and it's not so critical that the owner occupied, and the state recognized that the owner occupancy requirement was a big impediment to the production of these units, so that's why they nixed it. When you're doing a JADU and an ADU, the ADU can also be detached from your house. If you do that, you're limited to 800 square feet on the detached ADU. That's different than the size limitations for just a plain old run-of-the-mill detached ADU. So a huge change has been, you can now do these in multifamily projects. So I have clients that own a lot of multifamily properties, and we're doing these in some multifamily projects now. And the city of Santa Barbara is the first place we've done it, and they're on board with it. They've got the memo, and what you can do in a multifamily project is you are allowed in a multifamily building to convert portions of that building that are non-habitable into a new ADU. So that's like, typically that's a garage on a unit. People have said, oh, I've got this building with 4 units, I'm gonna split one of the units into 2 units. You can't do that. But if you have non-habitable areas, garages, storage areas that aren't living space, the quick test on living space is usually, is it heated or cooled? That's a really good litmus test to see if it's habitable space or not. You can take non-habitable space and convert that into an ADU within a multifamily building. So you're allowed to have at least one of those, regardless of the size of your project. So you got a duplex, you can take a garage and make it into a triplex. If you've got a really big multifamily property, you can do up to 25% of the density in your property. So I do have some clients that have 100-unit properties, and we're looking at doing multiple ADUs using this conversion method. In addition to this, on a multifamily property, you're also allowed to do up to 2 detached ADUs. And if you're gonna do that, they limit you to 16 feet in height. So they don't want you doing these multi-story ADUs on properties that are already multifamily, but they do provide the ability to get extra units as long as you're basically keeping them 1 story. And my read of the law is you're still subject to the regular state size limits on those, but some jurisdictions are interpreting part of the law to say that if you do those, you're limited to 800 square feet on those as well. Which is weird, because the law says they can't limit you to less than 800 square feet, and they're interpreting that to say that you're not allowed to do more than 800 square feet. They seem like fundamentally different concepts, but that's how the city of Santa Barbara looks at it. And the reality of it is, on a multifamily property, you're probably not going to do 2 detached ADUs that are bigger than 800 square feet. We've done some site plans for people, and it's a real struggle to even get close to 800 square feet on even 1 detached ADU on a lot of these properties. So the city is, pushing the envelope on that, but it sort of is meaningless because you really can't do it anyway. That's been our experience. So the next big change is on parking. So it used to be that if you converted a garage into an ADU, you had to provide replacement parking for it. But they gave you they gave you a lot of leeway on that. You could do it in a front setback in your existing driveway, for example, except in the county of Santa Barbara, and I'll cover that in a minute. But now you don't have to provide any replacement parking. So that's been a big deal. That's actually created new projects in places where we did have some constraints before. All along, there's been 5 exceptions to having to provide replacement parking, and the ones that were mostly applicable here in Santa Barbara area were if you're within half a mile of transit, or if you were converting existing space in a house into an ADU. And the city in its own local ordinance just said, look, everything meets these criteria, let's just not require parking at all. So in the city, this has sort of been the case for a while, but now it's a state law, so it is affecting things in the county. So the flip side of that is under some circumstances, you do have to provide parking. If you're doing a new detached ADU somewhere out in the county that isn't within half a mile of transit, you're gonna need to provide a parking space for it. Now they can only require 1 parking space. So, and on these bigger parcels, it's usually pretty easy to accommodate that. Now on parking spaces, another question that we get, it doesn't come in the form of a question, it comes in the form of a but we have statement. You can't park cars, just because you have a long driveway doesn't mean you can park 4 cars in it behind each other. The cars for each unit have to be able to get in and out independently. So if you can do 2 cars for a unit in tandem in a driveway, and that's fine because they're both for the same unit. But you can't stick a 3rd car in that driveway, which would depend on the cars from the other unit having to move to let that 1 car out. So just everybody should know a long driveway is not your salvation on this issue. We really have to look to the need to not have to provide parking anymore or falling within one of these exceptions. And again, those are half a mile of transit, converting existing space in a house or an existing accessory structure. And then the 3rd one is if you have a historical structure, sometimes that may apply, and that's a case where having a historical structure can help you out. And let me stress on the converting an existing structure, if you add so much as 10 square feet to your project, the city and county are gonna say, oh, that's not an existing structure, you did an addition now. And so now you're subject to having to provide the parking. So on sizes, because every ordinance that was a local ordinance that didn't comply with every provision of the new state law on January 1st, they're all null and void now. We're back to state standards on everything, and that includes sizes. So for a detached ADU, you can go up to 1,200 square feet. Again, our reality in the last few years of processing these is it's rare that anybody wants or needs to do a 1,200 square foot detached ADU, but you can do it. So if there's an existing single family residence on the site and you're doing an expansion of that residence to create an ADU, you are limited to 50% of the existing square footage of the residence. So on easy math, you got a 1,000 square foot house, you can do up to a 500 square foot addition to create an ADU on it. And that's something that threw a lot of people off because they thought, well, if I do like this big expansion of my house, then I get to count that new number and take half of that and use that. They made it really clear in the new law, it's the existing square footage of the house when you apply for the ADU project. Now, the other thing that people haven't realized, and this includes me up until about 6 months into this whole thing, is if you're creating an ADU within the footprint of an existing house, there's no size limit. So we've done a couple where we've had a 5,000 square foot house that had a wing on it that we wanted to turn into an ADU. And we're not adding 1 square foot to the house or changing the exterior envelope of the house at all. And we've done 2,000 square foot ADUs in cases like that, and that is absolutely allowed by state law. And it's weird because the state law didn't actively allow that. It sort of passively didn't put a limit on that. And then, fortunately, the way that local jurisdictions all interpreted that is there's no limit. So, and that's in practice what they've been doing. They've approved permits for this, so we know that they mean it. Now, when the city and county eventually get around to creating their new local ordinances to implement state law, the state has further handcuffed them on this, and they've said that a local ordinance cannot impose a size limit of smaller than 850 square foot on a one-bedroom ADU, or no, on any ADU. And then if you have a one-bedroom or larger ADU, they can't require that to be less than 1,000 square feet. And they also said, they said no other standards that would prevent an ADU of at least 800 square feet. So jurisdictions have done these really creative things with other standards, like the city of Santa Barbara's private open space standard, for example. They were like, well, we didn't limit the ADU, but you gotta meet your private open space, and then it's the private open space that limits your ADU, or certain height standards could limit your ADU. That these agencies, I'm sure Matt will talk about this, they're very creative at ways to evade compliance with the state law, and they count on people not pushing back. But I'm gonna let Matt cover that. On setbacks, basically your setbacks on ADUs they're 4 feet. So just think of 4 feet. If you're doing a detached one, your side and rear setbacks are going to be 4 feet. Your front setback still applies. And if you're doing additions to an existing structure, the addition has to have a 4-foot setback. Now on the existing structure, you get to keep the setbacks of that existing structure. And that's a huge change. Like before, it used to just be you had to preserve those rotting boards in your garage at the 0-foot setback to keep that setback. The new law says you can demolish that garage and build a brand new section of your ADU within the same physical dimensions as that garage. And I'm conservative on these things because I don't like clients to go down the path of a project and then walk into a propeller. So when I say same physical dimensions, I consider those to be 3-dimensional. So people have said, oh well, my garage is at 0-foot setback, so I can do a 2-story ADU at a 0-foot setback. And my advice to them is no, don't count on that. Even if you could under the law, you're going to get resistance to it from your local jurisdiction. So physical dimensions, I'm going to say, are 3-dimensional. So certainly your setbacks you can keep, but don't count on the idea that you're going to be able to do 2 stories in the space of a 1-story structure that you're demolishing. But it's really helpful because we've had cases in the past where people really wanted to keep a structure, to keep a setback, and only in cases where that setback was really critical did we advise anybody to do that, because keeping a structure and trying to work within an existing structure, as a rule of thumb, it almost doubles your build cost. So we've all had clients that they see a structure there and they believe it has some incredible value to it because it's there. And it doesn't have value just because it's there. The only value in that structure is if it somehow allows you to do something you couldn't do without it. The garage that was built in 1925 on the property, it's not valuable. Just bulldoze it and replace it. And you'll save money, I promise. Let's see here. So I went over these setbacks. The permitting time limits also have gotten shortened. They used to prescribe 120 days for these permits, and that's now been shortened to 60 days. Now, a common misconception is that they have to approve your permit in 60 days. That's not the case. They have to approve or deny your permit in 60 days. Okay, so people have tried to say, well, I turned it in, they have to approve it in 60 days. Well, there's 2 things that happen with that. The first one is they'll deem it incomplete. And that, they claim that stops the clock on your application. And I kind of agree with them on that. The law is like 60 days from a complete application. Now, what the city does, and the county to a lesser extent, is Maybe you won't be surprised to learn that every application is deemed incomplete. But they are. We've been doing ADUs for 3 years. We kind of know how to do them, and our applications, they're at this point, they're the evolution of 3 years of doing this. 3 years? Yeah, 3 years of doing this at this point. So we know what needs to be on the application. We put all that stuff on our applications up front, and for reasons that humanity may never understand, every one of them is deemed incomplete. So, and I've heard even so far as the staff's been given a directive to just deem everything incomplete. So what I think they're doing is they deem it incomplete, and then they look for reasons to have deemed it incomplete. We call it the no backsies policy. So we give it to them, it gets kicked back to us incomplete, and that stops the clock. And it's kind of dumb because we can just provide the information pretty quickly and get it back in, and eventually they have to deem it complete. And from that point, they have 60 days to approve it or deny it. But just make sure everybody understands that you can't just turn it in and then expect to have an approval in 60 days. And if you were to insist on that with the city, they'll say, okay, well, we just don't have the information we need to approve a building permit, so here's your denial. We've complied with state law. And they'd be right to do that. So that's something we need to make sure we're on the right side of when we're dealing with them. The design is ministerial only. And if you've heard me talk, I cover this every time, but it pays to cover it every time. There's 2 types of permits. There's discretionary, which means they can exercise discretion. They can exercise their judgment. The people who famously do this are Architectural Board of Review or Historic Landmarks, where they just don't like your gutters, or they want more divided lights in your windows. That's discretionary. Ministerial is, there is a bright line standard. So most building code requirements, all of them are ministerial. So is your building code requires that your railing must be 42 inches in height? Is it? If it is, they have to approve it, and if it's not, they will deny it. And so these ADUs are simply building permits, and they're ministerial only. So a city cannot say, well, yeah, we like your ADU, but we want you to make the windows smaller. We want you to change the roof to a gable roof or whatever. They are not allowed to do that. Basically, if anybody comes to you in an agency and they're giving you a comment like that, our default answer is, cool, show me the California Residential Code section that requires a gable roof. Oh, there isn't one? Okay, well then we're gonna stick with our flat roof. And that problem goes away. But they do try it, or they have new planners that aren't trained, and it's a universal change for planners and agencies to understand that they don't have unlimited power to make you do things. And so sometimes you have to remind them of that, and you can do it through requiring them to cite codes. They can't apply standards like floor area ratios, lot sizes, open space, etc. So we do still run into this even now, where we'll propose something and we'll get a plan check comment back like, this encroaches within the 1,250 square feet of required private open space. And it doesn't matter if it does that. It's that standard doesn't apply to an ADU. They get real creative with that one too. So like if you have a garage with an ADU above it, they'll say, well, the ADU can encroach, but the garage can't. And they'll say you have to submit this on 2 different building permits, with the idea being that they'll deny the garage permit, and by doing that, they'll deny your whole ADU permit. So we decided that the next time they do that, we're gonna turn in an ADU permit that just shows it in midair. And then they're gonna say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't work. There has to be something that supports it. And we'll say, well, oh, so are you saying that the garage that supports the ADU is fundamentally part of the same structure, and therefore it's part of the ADU? We haven't got to that point, but I'm looking forward to that point. CC&Rs, that's the next big thing I'm going to cover. So before, CC&Rs are private land use regulations, and before the state had superseded local government land use regulations, but the private regulations, they hadn't superseded those. So homeowners associations around here, Hope Ranch being a big one where this was an issue, their private CC&Rs didn't allow ADUs, and so ADU law just sort of didn't apply there. The state has eliminated that now, and they said that HOAs can adopt ADU regulations that are reasonable. I hate when they do that because some associations' idea of what's reasonable is clearly inconsistent with the intent of state law. So I got to read a memo from the attorney to the Hope Ranch Association where he claimed that, well, it would be reasonable to require that somebody has to build a brand new 2-car garage if they're gonna do an ADU, which is strange because state law says you don't even have to provide parking at all for an ADU. So how that's reasonable, that's something that's gonna get tested. I'm sure it's gonna get tested in court. And it'll be fun because most people in Hope Ranch have plenty of money to go to court and they like doing it. So that's gonna get sorted out. If it doesn't get sorted out here, it's gonna get sorted out elsewhere in the state. So real briefly, how are the local jurisdictions handling this? The city of Santa Barbara, they tried to pass an emergency ordinance that would have extended their non-compliant ordinance past January 1st, and they got a nice threatening letter about that from Matt's group. And it was very effective, and they changed it at the last minute, and they said the state law applies, but they are gonna put a temporary moratorium on high fire hazard areas, and also if it's going to have, if the ADU would have a detrimental effect on a historic resource. Okay, so high fire hazard areas, that's pretty much everything on Riviera and up from there, but you should always check whether you're in one of those or not before you tell anybody that there's potential for an ADU, because right now there's not. Now, the city before did allow that, but they had special standards. So they said you can do it in a high fire hazard area, but there's criteria you have to meet if you're gonna do that. And they were, they made a lot of sense, these criteria, and the state law wiped those criteria out, and so the city said, well, now that we don't have those, that's why we're gonna put a moratorium in the high fire hazard areas. My speculation is they're ultimately gonna allow ADUs up there again, but I can't tell you when they're going to do that. And you shouldn't, anybody making an investment decision right now should just assume that you'd never be able to do it, because the city moves at a glacier pace anyway. They may just take advantage of the fact that they can somehow ban these up there, and they love to ban things. So the county of Santa Barbara, they are they're in compliance with state law in the inland areas, but in the coastal zone, they claim that their own ordinance trumps state law because it's in the coastal zone, and that's highly debatable. State law didn't create exceptions for local ordinances that were non-compliant if they were in the coastal zone or any other criteria. And there's some real nuances to that I'm not going to get into because you have to be a land use planner to kind of understand what these things are. But the county is asserting this right now. So anybody working with a project in the county or representing clients in the coastal zone in the county should assume that you are still under the county's ordinance, and that if you try to do something that conflicts with that, you're gonna have to fight about it. And it might not surprise you that I'm busy fighting about that right now on at least one project for a client who is very well funded and looks forward to fighting with the county about it. So I'm thrilled to have that client. The city of Goleta they're in compliance. In fact, they took action before January 1st to update their standards to comply with new state law. So they're the only agency around here that was really on the ball and did that. And so they're basically in compliance with state law. And the city of Goleta, oftentimes they've been sort of the most difficult jurisdiction to deal with around here. When it's come to ADUs, they've really been one of the best. Like, one of the places they've shown some real leadership is on the development impact fees. So they had some pretty high development impact fees, and they ended up adopting fees, which were, like if you're doing an ADU less than 500 square feet, there's no fees. And then for bigger ones than that, or detached ones, the fees are really reasonable, and they do relate to the size and impacts of the ADU. And that's what state law says now. They say that if a local jurisdiction is gonna have fees, they have to be proportional to the impacts of what the ADU is gonna be. Now, again, that's subjective, and what the county of Santa Barbara thinks is proportional is like, maybe we would never think that's proportional. But the city of Goleta did something right. The city of Santa Barbara has never charged development impact fees for ADUs. So they're all over the map, and I can't really go into detail on those right now, other than to say the city of Goleta does it right, and I hope that every other jurisdiction that's gonna do it looks at what they did and follows their lead on that. The city of Carpinteria, you know, they claim they're not subject to ADU law. They claim that because they are consistent with their regional housing needs, that they're not subject to ADU law. And it's strange that they think that, because ADU law doesn't create that exemption for anybody. And then their next reason they said is because they're in the coastal zone, they're also exempt, which is also not the case. So Carpinteria is finally beginning to look at doing some local standards that comply with state law. And I think they've got their first meeting on that this week, if they didn't already have it this week. I don't go to the very first meeting on a lot of these things because everything is just so wildly open. It's like I like to watch the finals, you know, and that's when it matters to me, you know, who's going to win. So I like to come in on ordinances and things sort of towards the end when things have really been fleshed out, and then, you know, hone down on those things and get them the way they need to be. So City of Carpinteria, I mean, the best I can say is they're doing something. And in the meantime, the City of Carpinteria is subject to state law. And again, I haven't had a project there. I've got one that's probably going to end up this way, but you know, people have been told, well, you can't submit an ADU application, and we're definitely going to submit one. We're going to submit it and say, hey, that's cool. Deny it, and clearly articulate that the fact you're denying it is because you believe you're not subject to state ADU law, and then we'll go. That'll be a very useful tool for us when we sue you. So that's the city of Carp, and that's everything I've got for you today, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt.